Hello and welcome to Driving Forces, our second episode, and we are delighted to be here in Town Hall hearing room. Today we'll be talking to Ann Wright. Ann is the coordinator in Arlington for Mothers Out Front, and this series, as you know, focuses on social activism and the people who are involved in that sphere, and telling stories of organizations and movements, and also of the people themselves. So Ann, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
So I'd like to start just by, I'd like to talk today both about the organization itself and about your own path, your own journey to this place. But let's start by talking about Mothers Out Front itself. Can you just give our viewers some sense of what the history of the organization is? Because I have to say, it is a conspicuous presence in and around town.
That's good to hear. Yes, Mothers Out Front was founded about 4 years ago when one local mother, Kelsey Worth, approached another local mom, Vanessa Rule, after a climate change presentation in the area, and said, I'm terrified of what climate change means for the future of my children and grandchildren, and can you join me and get active about this? I think they both saw that the climate change movement and the environmental movement was dominated by other people and not mothers, and didn't have a really strong grassroots element to it, and desperately needed passion and the moral factor. And I think they both wanted to skirt arguing facts and figures and say that we hear that the scientists say that we're close to no turning back point in terms of the climate and the rising of temperatures and the parts per million. And we don't want to argue about the science anymore. And in fact, we want to build a grassroots movement that will be undeniable and that will force change. And that was the beginning.
That's great. And so has the growth from that point forward been fairly organic? How have things kind of unfolded or unspooled from there?
It took off very quickly. It turned out that their intuition was right, that there was an untapped passion of mothers for working on this issue, and sort of an outrage and a sense of moral truth. And within a half a year, they had had dozens of house parties and hundreds of moms sign up. So that was in Massachusetts. We now have approximately 12 organizing teams and a few more budding right now throughout Massachusetts. It spread to New York State, both upstate and city area, and then spread to a seaside area in Virginia, where the moms quite often can't get their kids to school because of the rising sea level. And so they have a very natural outrage and point there to be organized around. And then California, Ohio, and it's spreading, and we have the resources with a lot of volunteer power to spread to at least 10 other staff-supported, not necessarily staffed in the area, but staff-supported area around the country. As of right now, we're in the process of choosing those among many more names that have come in.
Interesting. So I note that you said we're in the process of choosing. So that must mean that there is some kind of central leadership group who is organizing to some degree this expansion. I'm curious because in an earlier conversation in this series, we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how part of its power but also certainly very fundamental to its nature is the fact that it's very decentralized, and that the things that are motivating people in different locales might be a little bit different, but that part of what is the identity of that movement is that they are all kind of local, concerned, some things that tap into universal concerns, et cetera, but very kind of locally organized and run and driven. Is that the same with these, I'm just going to call them kind of chapters or Mothers Out Front groups in different parts of the country? How are these things structured? How are you managing, I guess, this, pretty dramatic growth over a short period of time?
Yeah, it sounds very similar to Black Lives Matter in that what unites us is an overall concern about climate change for the entire Earth, but we encourage people to organize around local issues where they can see the effects of climate change or the sources of climate change. So, for example, one of our big leaps in Arlington was realizing that there are 177 at least, and actually we're sure there are more. There are 177 identified gas leaks from our pipes in our town. So on October 1st last year, we went around and organized lots of teams to tag those leaks because normally they're invisible. How are people going to know? But people do know because they smell them. And we had a big map up at Town Day. I don't know if you saw it.
Absolutely, we did.
With little flags and pins in each link, and people would come by and say, yes, I've been smelling that for 3 years, and I've been trying to get them to come fix it. And so even though those gas leaks aren't the ultimate problem in global climate change, they're a piece of it, because the methane that's leaking out of that is about 86 times more potent in terms of climate change, in terms of the ozone layer, than carbon dioxide is what we've learned. And so it is a problem. It's a problem both for the lungs of the children right around those gas leaks, or the adults, and it's a problem for the raising of the temperatures earthwide.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that another group, perhaps, might, once this had come into their awareness, they might think that the thing they needed to do was raise their voices and make sure that local government was responsive to this issue, and that got out there, that in other words, kind of lobbying, making use of the existing political process. I love the idea, and I'm not sure if I have it accurately or not, but I love the idea that you guys said, let's do this thing in October. Let's actually get out there and do the work that somebody else, we could just try and get somebody else to do it, or we could do it ourselves. Is that an intrinsic ethos in the group? Or?
Yes, and what that gets to is our organizing methodology, which honestly is one of the main things that's kept me with Mothers Out Front. I think we don't have much of a chance of turning around climate change without a huge grassroots movement. I think there are too many interests in the industry, in the gas industry, government, et cetera, and just maybe intransigency, what's that word? Intransigence about the way things are, keeping things the way they are, to really change things. But I think we've seen throughout history that huge things can be changed with people power, and that is what Mothers Out Front believes in. So even if there were, say, a federal law that we could go after, we wouldn't do that, at least at first. We start from the bottom up. We have a theory of change that says that you build power at the local level. You focus on something that's going to continue building that power and our capacity for building that grassroots movement, and you move up. So one thing we did besides tagging those gas leaks is last year we introduced a warrant article to town meeting for something called community choice aggregation, and we got it passed. And I want everybody to know this because a lot of people, there were many articles on that at that town meeting, and you very well may have missed it. But it approved pursuing community choice aggregation, which will turn the entire town's residences and businesses' electricity to be sourced by 5% more renewable energy than currently is required by the state. We have a state regulation around that. So the current percentage of our electricity that has to be powered by renewables is 12% this year. It goes up 1% every year. We're going to add at least 5% to that. It's kind of in red tape right now, slowly moving, but any month now, probably this spring, every resident will get a notice saying we're about to be switched over to more renewables for the entire town. So we're very proud of that.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's affecting change right on the ground, but also using the existing process that is in Arlington for doing so on a town-wide basis. Is that kind of action, and particularly a kind of legislative action, is that being mirrored in other communities in this area?
Absolutely. In this area, and in fact across the country, yeah, we've had, I consulted with Boston, who is trying to pass a CCA, Community Choice Aggregation, this spring, they hope. I'm not sure how they're doing. Other towns, Bedford and Cambridge and Brookline, have all looked at it as well. And just this morning, I started consulting with somebody over in California who's looking at it. So every state has different laws that, to whatever extent, allows or doesn't allow this type of breaking away from the default electrical provider or not. So we have to look into what the California laws are. But there is a lot of energy around the country. And we do both this gas leaks tagging and looking at the dangers of methane gas and CCA are examples of things that are spreading like wildfire. It's great.
Yeah, and definitely there are ways in which we don't have to, and clearly this is part of the message of Mothers Out Front, is that there are ways in which we don't simply have to accept the status quo that that federal legislation or even state legislation has set as the minimum. We can always...
That's right. Well, and there is legislation filed already this legislative year that would up that 1% more every year to either 2 or, I hear there's a bill that is proposing 3, which would really take us over the top in terms of safety. It was filed last year as well, did not pass. We're hoping with our work and other organizations' work, it may pass this year, either the 2% or 3%.
So is a group like Mothers Out Front, whose clear commitment is to, as you say, from the bottom up, grassroots, the power emanating from those roots, do you see a place for lobbying legislators at the state level, for instance? Or would you be involved in trying to get sponsorship of this kind of bill that you were just mentioning? Is that something that Mothers Out Front sees as part of it?
Absolutely. We're part of a coalition called Mass Power Forward, and we had our climate lobby day just last month. And a lot of us, combined with other, say, Sustainable Arlington and other towns, all converged on the State House and did our visits, and it was very well organized by Mass Power Forward and Clean Water Action. To make sure visits were done statewide. Mothers
Out Front, it prominently projects that word and all that is associated with it in terms of mothers take care of problems. Mothers worry about things that others aren't, and they do something about it. So that all makes a ton of sense to me. I assume, though, that the members of Mothers Out Front now extend beyond people who are actually mothers to include, I don't know, generations both ways, grandmothers and children. Is that the case?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a big grandmother contingent, and in fact, grandmothers are often the ones, if they've retired by then, their kids are grown, who have a little more time. So there's fabulous participation on grandmothers' part. And we've had men come to our meeting from time to time, and we call it mother-led or mother-powered. We'll accept any help we can get.
Right. No constraints on membership or activism in this case.
Sure, of course.
And speaking of no constraints, it's very clear that the genesis of Mothers Out Front was concern about our global environment and about climate change. And I assume that continues to be the primary concern. Is it the only one, or is Mothers Out Front also getting involved in other issues of, I don't know, social justice and equity, et cetera, or only if they touch on the climate issue?
Our mission is a swift and equitable transition to a renewable infrastructure for energy. And we do have a concern and an analysis that says that poor communities, people of color, have historically been the ones that have suffered the effects of all sorts of environmental damage, and that, of course, includes climate change. So I would guess that the utilities might think they can lay pipelines that may not be needed and that could be dangerous through poor communities, because sometimes, well, they think that they have less wherewithal to fight that. It can be true, but it's also, they're very powerful poor communities and communities of color who have always stood up for their rights and are very knowledgeable about these kind of things. So we proactively have addressed what we call environmental justice and have that as a part of our strategy and tactics. For example, the Hampton Roads, Virginia group, Mothers Out Front group, was a tactical choice on the leadership group, saying we absolutely don't want to only be in blue states or wealthier states like Massachusetts. Let's go down, and they very easily identified some allies and some energetic moms down in Hampton Roads, and it's spreading to Norfolk, and they're working on various things down there. We do feel like it should be locally controlled, as long as that local mission does have a link to the global climate change problem.
That's very interesting to hear. So it is not as if this group of mothers in Virginia had come together and then somehow through research, through the internet or something like that, had come upon the work of Mothers Out Front. It was, in fact, as you say, a tactical decision by Mothers Out Front based here in Massachusetts to say, there's got to be like-minded or people facing the same kinds of compelling issues in their communities all over this country.
That's right. Although sometimes it does come the other way. We have people coming to us saying, help, the sea level's rising, and I'm concerned for my children, I'm concerned for my property, and I read about you on the web, and start me up. So we have more inquiries like that than we can handle.
Yeah. Sounds like in general there's maybe just more that can be done and that you want to do than is feasible at the moment, and
Absolutely.
That's a great problem to have, obviously.
It is. It's good. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about you personally. I know that you're a longtime Arlington resident. Tell us a little bit about, were you born, with a drive for community activism? Did it come about as a result of circumstances in your life? Just let us know a little bit about where you come to this from.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I was born with that fire in my belly, but I think I was sensitive to injustice and inequity from a very young age. And then in college, I actually, in a text, in a politics course, I read about a kind of semi-Quaker organization called Movement for a New Society, who were Quakers and others who wanted to affect grassroots change and had a belief in kind of framing a new society that was more based on justice and environmentalism and anti-racism. And they did a lot of nonviolence training. And this was around the time of the Clamshell Alliance and the anti-nuclear power movement. And it was very, very exciting. The numbers of people getting arrested and protesting were growing quickly. And so I left college temporarily to become a nonviolence trainer for the anti-nuclear movement. And the rest was history. I just loved it, went on from there. And it's where I get my hope. I mean, especially since the Trump election, this is the thing that keeps me out of the dumps. It's fun, it's inspiring. There are also these great people who are working toward a better world.
Yeah, it works as an somewhat of an antidote to things happening,
right.
An antidepressant, yes, to things happening at the macro level.
Yeah.
Partly because it's not just that you're tapped in this way to positive energy and commitment, but also because you're doing things that can be, you can do things, and then you're making those things happen. And I think that really is a great way to mitigate the sense of kind of resignation or, I guess on an extreme level, hopelessness some folks might feel in the wake of things, such an powerful and disconcerting surprise in the election, as we know.
Yeah. And I want to say, too, that we may be privileged here in Massachusetts, and I may think, oh, it's those moms in Virginia whose houses are going to be swamped. Well, it's getting a little personal around here as well. I realized just last year, I read in the newspaper about insurance companies in Louisiana who were bailing out and saying of the Bayou region that they had some big floods, and that they decided they just couldn't afford, it wasn't cost effective for them to cover homeowners there. And then I realized, oh, I live in East Arlington, love East Arlington, it's my favorite part of Arlington. We are 4 feet above sea level. If you do the numbers and read a little, you realize when my children are my age, or earlier, my house may not be insurable. And it kind of started to disassemble my plans for leaving my house to my kids. I have 4 children, thinking maybe one of them at least may need or want to live there if times get tough for them. And then I thought they might not even want my house if it's not insurable. So it's getting pretty personal.
You mentioned a couple of times that you have 4 kids, and what's the age range there?
Oh.
Are any of them? Well, you tell me.
I have twin 15-year-olds still at home at Arlington High, and I have 2 out of the nest already, a 21 and a 25-year-old son. Got it.
So with them or with others of that generation, it seems to me you are very busy. The organization itself is very busy. As a coordinator in Arlington, you must be. How are you? What's the message that you do give and would like to give to those who might be watching? I don't know. I won't put words in your mouth. What is the message you'd like to give to 8-year-olds and 15-year-olds about both what you and Mothers Out Front are doing and just about how to kind of navigate through this world that we're looking at right now?
Yeah. Well, I would challenge them to think about themselves as people in charge of their future and their lives. And it's not easy. It can't be done with a flick of a switch or one action. But I think people united really can change things and make our economy and our energy future a safer one. And there is lots of training available for whatever kind of activism you might be interested in. We at Mothers Out Front have jobs for the intense introverts who don't want to go to meetings. We've got plenty of data entry to do, flyers to be posted, things like that. And then we've got, for the extroverted, we've got speaking and knocking on doors, and there's all sorts of things to be done.
Right. There's no personality type that would be a bar to
No.
making constructive use of their energy.
Yeah, and we also mothers are all busy pretty much by definition, and we try really hard to have very manageable small tasks for anybody to do.
And how much of your own time does this work take?
Well, I'd say on the local level, maybe 5 up to 10 hours a week. But I also have really grown to love the organization and love the idea of replication and expansion. So I joined the National Learning and Expansion team, and that's why I was talking about we're considering and figuring out where we're going to expand to. In my former job where I worked for at-risk youth in a national organization, my job was replication and sort of standards of how do you hold on to a good standard and a good model as you're replicating and growing across, say, a country.
So I'm wondering, with obviously decades of experience in this area, what lessons you feel like you've learned and would like to share, or what things you think could have been done better or could be done better by movements such as Mothers Out Front and progressive movements more generally.
I mean, I guess I could say I wish a lot of us in progressive circles had been paying more attention to what the Tea Party was doing 15 years ago or so, because they really turned things around and had very powerful organizing methodologies. And I wish also that that progressives would pay attention to racism and classism and bridging gaps between all different constituencies, and have very accessible language to thoughts and theories about social change and social justice, and that listen well to problems that all different Americans have. And it might have prevented a huge Trump victory.
Yeah, there is this whole kind of cloistered nature of a lot of progressive politics over the, in general, but over the last number of years. And I think since the Obama victory, I think there was a sense that, those things will take care of themselves.
Right. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, and I'm hopeful that groups like Mothers Out Front, that's what unites us. We're not a partisan movement. We've been bringing moms out of the woodwork of various political persuasions. Mm-hmm. So it's hopeful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much
for
joining us today, and this has been a very enlightening conversation, and appreciate what you're doing, what the rest of the group is doing. I know that you're going to be around for the long haul, and again, as we said earlier, this is all a wellspring of hope and optimism and positivity as we look at a future that feels uncertain in any number of ways. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having me on.
And so I conclude this conversation with Ann Wright from Mothers Out Front, and we look forward to continuing this series, talking to other prominent social activists in the area and sharing that with you. Thanks for joining us. I'm James Milan.